And J Lava is in a fucking building with the Keep It P podcast, motherfucker.
Von Savage and J Lava on the new podcast. They Keep It P podcast, where they take news, situations, and everyday occurrences and show how one could or could not be keeping it P.
I'm Keep It P. As a matter of fact, Keep It P, but then again, Keep It PG, PE. Alright, it's Professor Griff. I'm out of here.
To the family, this is Kendra Blackwood with Hold the Mayo, the segment where I bust down and expose the lies in these here articles. But before I get started, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, the Hot Lava Music TV YouTube channel, Von Savage Media YouTube channel, and all the channels on the network. And with that being said, today we discuss a book called Nice Racism by Robin DiAngelo. Review, a deeply revealing lesson on white supremacism. This ought to be interesting. It says that this is a powerful new book from the author of White Fragility reveals why profound racism is often found in supposedly liberal spaces. Which basically means that the Democrats and the Republicans are wings on the same bird. Anyway, it goes on to say, in 1952, the anti-racist activist and librarian Juliet Hampton Morgan famously observed in a letter to a friend that polite white people were our biggest problem in combating American white supremacy. The outspoken Southern white writer and teacher had been pulling emergency brakes on buses in Montgomery, Alabama when black patrons were intentionally left on the sidewalk, and wrote letters to local newspapers critiquing segregation. What horrified her just as much as the normalized treatment of black Americans was the way white decency obstructed social change. 70 years later, Robin DiAngelo explores some of the enduring facets of this practice. Citing deeply revealing and recurring anecdotes from her career as an anti-racist educator, DiAngelo analyzes how white Americans who deem themselves inoculated against racism uniquely embody racist practices, including herself. She characterizes racism as a collective racial bias backed by legal authority and institutional control, in which individuals and communities participate. DiAngelo pertinently distinguishes anti-racist strategies from the valued currency of white friendliness, writing, "Niceness does not indicate a lack of racism and is not the solution to racism. Nor does a culture of niceness indicate that racism is not present in the environment." As evidence for this assessment, she describes straight-up racial illiteracy, such as the perennially irksome people should just see each other as humans, from proud liberal attendees who insinuate that they are beyond the workshop on race, demonstrating how a gradation in white supremacy is nevertheless white supremacy. Sheesh. That was a mouthful. But definitely speaking some truth. It goes on to say, highly instructional, with pertinent questions for white readers who consider themselves sufficiently woke or have felt attacked in discussions around race. Nice Racism interrogates the machinery of white progressiveness and how these gears actually work. Many of these liberal-sanctioned tactics still prioritize the insecurities, performance, pride and superiority of whiteness over the literal needs of racially marginalized communities. And yet, across the political landscape, these are the very so-called open-minded white people that BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, are encouraged to find legislative or civil alliances with when combating racism. DiAngelo's book brings scrutiny, racial theory and first-hand experience to what many people of color already know. It's places like the Democratic National Convention, the Feminist Book Club, the liberal-identified workplace where you will encounter some of the most profound racism you've ever experienced. Tedious, defensive tropes that are commonly used against critiques of racial illiteracy, such as adopting black children, having a partner of color or a diverse group of friends, are dissected and refuted almost mathematically. DiAngelo explores the ideology of white feminism as a product of nice racism, in which many of these dynamics are employed by white women to the denigration, silencing and decentralizing of women of color in feminist spaces. It's here that DiAngelo underscores that nice racism, as a concept, doesn't just impede racial consciousness but can also foster hostility towards those prompting it. Nice racism is not so nice when you push back on it. DiAngelo recounts a number of workshops and discussions led specifically for white women. In one for white self-identified feminists, she asks the participants to compile a list of advantages of being white for discussion. According to DiAngelo, one group rattles off the pedestrian, not being followed in stores and ample representation in media, before caveating these personal observations with the claim that motherhood is universal to all women, regardless of race. DiAngelo responded, "Motherhood is perhaps one of the starkest examples of the differences between white women and black women," referencing racism in healthcare, education, infant and maternal mortality rates, among many other issues. The progressive white feminists were so offended by this correction, at an equity conference no less, that they left during the break and sent a message to DiAngelo to say that they weren't coming back. White feminism often writes itself. Most potent though is DiAngelo's urgency to get the reader to consider whiteness, its solutions, promises, assumptions and casual narratives of self-importance. It's in these spaces that we see white supremacy at its most unadorned, the inflation of self based on the mythology that racism has afforded. DiAngelo's participants mirror back this wholesale belief, so much so that when she asks them to scrutinize the racial superiority they have inherited, they can't. They see being white as neutral in an otherwise racialized world that they often don't feel equipped to speak in. I think of this lens when she pointedly prompts white readers. We might ask ourselves why we think the best response to racial inequality is niceness. I got to guess. Maybe they don't want to confront the evils of their past. Or they don't want to pay what they owe. I'm just saying. It's a question only they can answer. All I'm saying is, keep that same energy. Pull up season on you sucker MCs. Don't forget. jlava.com. tzvonsavage.com.
Music TV.
Ways for you to run my cash.
Check reparation. Check reparation. Check reparation. Check reparation. Check reparation. Check reparation. Check reparation.
Tryna bring it back, 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 back. Tryna bring it back, 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 back. Tryna bring it back, back, back.
I bring it back like I took you from the premises. I bring it back like it's stolen from my nemesis. I bring it back. Shawty bang my line. You can holler at me later. Shawty bang my line. Shawty bang my line. Bang my line. You can holler at me later. Shawty bang my line. You can catch me on the book or DM me at IG. Consider me. Look, I don't play with this shit. You don't even know what I gave to this shit. Self-made with this shit. I slay with this shit. Been a lot of roads I done paved with this shit. Look.
Taking flight, changing life in one night. By 2 a.m. if you do it right. Up late like nigga night. Small fish, big appetite. Get an extra 4 if you whip it right. Got good gas and it's light bright. Got big balls and a good pipe. One call it inside.
Wave that you could just go and say. This is a possible way for me to go and lay. Man, I knew it was something, couldn't ignore it. It was faith, it was faith. I was in this bitch and I definitely belong here. And now that I'm here, I'ma change.
Yeah, I'm an animal, red gorilla. I eat your dog, your poochie. Get what you're gonna get, front and center.
Which I grew up living life, which I knew, standing on my toes, graduated with my honors. TC scientific, getting to what's the plan? C, throw the kickback, zip, sack, throw a kick song, get the applause.